They see all the BS that happens with the black brown teachers. They don't say nothing during these meetings. But then after the meeting's over and everything, say, hey, thank you so much for saying that. If they were to voice the same concern, they would have been more receptive just for the simple fact that it's coming from the mouth of a white person.
Welcome to Toddle School Leaders Project. I'm your host, Cindy Blackburn, and today I'm talking with Kwame Sarfo-Mensah. He's the author of Learning to Relearn, and this book really is a storytelling experience that dives into identity-affirming practices. We talk about how school leaders can take actions to audit the current levels of equity in their schools and take action to make their schools more equitable places for learning. You're not going to miss a single second, so let's jump right in. Kwame, I am so excited to have you here on the School Leaders Project. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Cindy. I'm excited to be here.
I'd love for you to kind of set the stage for our audience. I found you because you have just published a new book. So might you share a little bit about the work that you do and the work that you're most passionate about?
Yes, absolutely. So, my name is Kwame Salford-Mensah, for those who are listening, and I've been in the education field for about close to 18 years now. Started my career in Philadelphia as a middle school math teacher, did that for 4 years, and then transitioned to Boston for another 5 years in that same capacity. And since 2019, I've been abroad with my family um, as a freelance consultant, working through my firm, Identity Talk Consulting, which is a consultancy that focuses on three pillars. We talk about identity affirming education, culturally responsive teaching, and anti-bias, anti-racist practices. So anything
Beautiful.
from curriculum, pedagogy to everything else in between. We're focused on at least one of those three pillars. And as Cindy mentioned, I also do write books. So my third book came out a few months ago called Learn to Relearn. And we
Congratulations.
just learned that Learn to Relearn just won a gold medal for the EPI Awards for
What?
Best Education Book for Commentary and Theory. So we just found out a few days ago. And there are a few more awards that it's up for, and we may have more to celebrate in the coming days. So we're excited about that, and I'm excited to be here on the podcast to talk with you.
Yay, congratulations. I didn't know about that gold medal win. That's pretty exciting.
But I had to relearn that I had other roles as well. I'm also a father. I'm a husband, right? Who always had to navigate these different worlds. Then all those conversations shut down because they've been doing it for so long, and it's now taking a physical and emotional, psychological toll on them. I mean, I think as educators, that should be a mantra that we should all embody, learning to
Mm,
relearn. So often, as teachers, we're taught to be reflective practitioners. But
right.
usually when we say that, it's with regard to how we deliver instruction for that day, um, how we executed the lesson plan, how we crafted the lesson plan. Did we interact with our students the way we should have? Those are all part of the reflection piece. But when I talk about this mantra of learn to relearn, I'm talking about how much we reflect on the humanity of our students and also our colleagues too, particularly those who may not come from the same backgrounds that we come from. How do we treat them, and what ideas have we grown to think about these people? And
Mm.
so when I was thinking about the title, and it took a while to even arrive at this title, I just kept thinking about my own experience. I thought about what it meant for me to be a father, what it meant for me to be a first generation Ghanaian American who has always had to navigate these different worlds, one being as an American and the other being as a Ghanaian, but not feel like you're fully in those spaces because of the intersection of those identities.
Oof.
I thought about my international experience being an expat even though I'm on the African continent and clearly I'm a black man, I understand that there are privileges that come with me being an American citizen, me having an official passport, me having multiple passports, which I can use to go to different countries. Those are things that not everybody is able to have access to. I've had to come to that realization being abroad. So, Learn to Relearn, in essence, is a book that's really just about how we can create learning spaces that allow for each and every student to be fully and unapologetically themselves, regardless of their racial background, their linguistic backgrounds, their faith, their
Mm.
ethnicity, and all these other identity markers they bring to the table. Because we know that a lot of what's been happening, particularly over the past 4 or 5 years, have revolved around the policing of identities.
Yeah.
And I wanted to write a book that was different from other books that have been written because there have been many education books and many social science books that have talked about anti-racism and the importance of intersectionality. There's a lot of research out there, but I didn't come across a book that really delved into the issues that different historically marginalized communities deal with within the K-12 system. Like, for
Mm.
example, if I wanted to learn about the plight of indigenous or native students in schools, there's a book that's exclusively about that.
Right.
If we're talking about Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, there's a book that talks about that. Same with um, Latinx communities and other strongly marginalized communities, LGBTQIA plus communities. There's books in that talk exclusively about those different communities. But I wanted to bring all that together into
Mm.
one. And that was a daunting task. I didn't realize how daunting of a task it was trying to be inclusive of every single identity marker
Right.
in a way that I was going to honor and respect the stories of the different folks who I interviewed from those different communities because I knew being a cis hetero black male, there was no way for me to share about the stories of all these different communities. I had to bring other voices in to really make this a full spectrum moment. And I'm so glad that I was able to get the voices of over 30 different educators throughout the course of this book. And there are a few more who I interviewed that didn't even make the book because with the publishers, you got a word count. You can't include
Yeah.
everybody. So I had to be very selective in who I brought on. But I tell you, Cindy, that process was a daunting one, but one where I had to follow the very mantra that this book is, the actual title.
Today's episode of the podcast is brought to you by Toddle, your all in one teaching and learning platform made for teachers and by teachers. If you're starting to uncover ways to use AI in your classrooms or to have a more connected and integrated curriculum, Toddle might just be for you. Check us out at toddleup.com. Now, back to my episode with Kwame. Mm. Well, what I love in the language that you use there is there was just so much empathy, and it feels like just creating this space for evolving identity. And that, like, I think that's something that I've learned in the past year is just that your identity just continues to grow and evolve over time, and having that space to explore it and to explore the lenses through which you see the world and how those shape your perspective. So I'm
Right.
wondering, you said learning to relearn, and that you had some big aha moments. What did you best learn, or what did you most learn as a result of this kind of process of these interviews?
So amazingly enough, Cindy, a lot of my learning happened once I stopped teaching in the classroom.
Mm,
So since moving abroad, I have not been in any K-12 space as a
yeah.
classroom teacher. So I've had time to reflect and unpack and process different moments throughout my career. Because when you're in the trenches, as you know very well, it's so fast paced. There's always something to do. There's
Mm.
lessons to plan for. There are parents to call. There are grade level meetings to attend. There are report cards to write up. There are field trips to go to. There's always something going on. Even though we have prep periods, the prep periods are filled up with making copies of papers and rushing to the machine before your colleagues get there. Because if you don't, you're not going to be able to get there for the rest of this week. And you got a class coming in the next 5 minutes, and you don't have anything prepared for them. So it's real. There's so
Oh,
much going
yeah.
on within the school day, but also within the 200 plus days of a school year. So to be able to have that time of solitude and the idle time to finally reflect, that allowed for me to really come to some moments about about who I was. For all these years, I lived with my identity as an educator,
It's who it was the core
but then I
identifier.
had to relearn. But I had to relearn that I had other roles as well. I'm also a father. I'm a husband.
Mm.
I'm a mama's son, right? I'm an uncle. I have pastimes that I enjoy. I had to remind myself that there are other parts of who I am that I needed to give more attention to. So being out of that classroom space allowed me to come to that epiphany about who I was. And it's a shame that it took that long for me to get there because
Mm.
ideally you want to be able to do this unpacking while you're still in the trenches. But
Yeah.
I had all the time in the world being able to do that because quite frankly, I was looking for jobs. When we first moved to Ethiopia in 2019, the goal was for me to continue teaching in an international school. But I
Yeah.
didn't realize how different the culture was with international schools. There's a different vibe when it comes to that. Even with the recruiting, um, I didn't come across that until I actually landed in Addis Ababa, and I realized that I was already behind the eight ball because even though
The
it was
timing.
like springtime, they had already finished their recruiting much early in the school year. See, I didn't realize how different that was. So I ended up being home while everybody else was out of the house. My wife was out the house working. My son was in school. So I'm at home with nothing to do.
Digging deeper.
So I had to make some shifts as I'm doing this reflecting. And that's what ultimately led to me starting to podcast. So I actually
Oh,
started a podcast a few months after we arrived in Addis Ababa because I needed to have a space where I could talk to teachers.
yeah.
And I couldn't find that space in the time that I was in Addis. So I had to create a space of my own. And that's how my podcast, Identity Talk for Educators Live, was born because I needed that space to be nosy and find out what people are doing in the classroom still. You know, I'm out the league, so let me find a way to just keep up with what's going on, and that's what allowed me to do it. And 5 plus years later, I'm still doing it. I've interviewed well over 200 educators, and
Wow.
a lot of those conversations ended up getting into the book because I found myself talking to different teachers who are coming from these different countries, who are coming with these different identities. So we're
Mm.
having all kinds of conversations about race. We're talking about language. We're talking about religion. We're talking about sexual orientation and gender identity. We're talking about all kinds of identity based harm that they've experienced personally, but also have seen their students experience in their school communities. So
Yeah.
when you are constantly talking to these different educators, now you're starting to realize that, oh, wow, there's a lot of identity based harm going on, and there isn't really a space for people to open up about what's happening because in certain spaces, if you do open up, it could lead
Mm.
to certain ramifications. It could lead to
Yeah.
their jobs being, it could lead to them jeopardizing their careers. So there's some real fears around speaking up in the name of truth. So being able to have educators come into the podcast and share their stories and be vulnerable and be open, that really allowed for some true testimonies to be revealed.
Hmm. It makes me wonder for a leader who's listening to this and hearing this of you didn't get to do this work while you were in the trenches because there wasn't the space for it. And then you saw that experience mirrored for educators who are in the trenches and maybe not even if they've got the time to reflect on it, are then also feeling afraid to share their experiences. So how do leaders create kind of a soft landing space for this kind of work to happen?
I think humility is the key. Humility.
Hmm.
Them understanding that the need for teachers to have a space where they can open up about this identity based harm is not always an indictment on you as a leader.
Right.
If anything, it's an opportunity for you as a leader to really build a stronger relationship with your staff members.
Right.
So,
Trust.
yeah, so I'm even thinking back to the last school I taught in when I was in Boston, and there were attempts at talking about these issues that I talk about in the book. There were microaggressions taking place. There was some clear discrimination happening when it came to the teachers of color and what they're experiencing. We did see people ignoring some of that identity-based harm. And when you did report it to the principal, it was just swept under the rug
Oh,
because, oh, this person's about to retire. So I got a lot of stories about that, but I'm not going to divulge it right here. All I can say is there were attempts to address the issue. Boy, what happened is when my white colleagues started to cry about what's going on, they started to feel guilty, then all those conversations shut down. So to give people context, my principal was a white woman. My assistant principal was also a white woman. So of course, majority of the teachers are white. I'm one of the few
yeah.
teachers of color. So if you have multiple teachers of colors, multiple white teachers feeling guilty and not able to handle the discomfort of the conversations, oh, we gotta protect them, let's shut it down. And that's what
Yeah.
continued to happen. So it got to a point where you had the teachers of color feeling like, you know what, they're not going to address this issue, so why do I even keep on bringing it up? And that's
Right.
how those conversations died down. So yes, there was those issues were identified, but they were never addressed properly. And that's why I always reflect on it.
Woof. And I can see in my head like 1,000 people nodding along to this of having that same shared experience. Especially, U.S. independent schools have a certain, like there are cultures that exist in these schools, and to threaten the status quo can be intimidating. So again, what do you do as a leader? Like, how do you? It's one thing to hear, it's one thing to be an empathetic ear and to create the space, but when these issues are coming up, like, what does action look like in that context?
I think first and foremost, when you have a black or brown teacher come to you as a leader
Yeah.
and they're telling you, hey, I've experienced harm in this way, believe them. Believe them when they say that. Don't make excuses for the colleague who imposed the harm on that teacher. Believe them. Acknowledge the story. Take the time to investigate what happened. Because what happens is this: a lot of teachers, they'll come up to the principal, and the principal
Mhm.
will make an excuse on behalf of the teacher imposed the harm. They'll say they'll handle it, but they don't handle it. And then that's when the trust starts to erode. And
Right. Why am
that's
I going
when
to come see you?
tension starts to rise. Because now, as a teacher, you're seeing your principal not have your back, right?
Yeah.
And there are way too many stories I've seen of black teachers dealing with that situation, and it happened so much that it drove them out the profession.
It's heartbreaking.
So, so you have a teacher retention issue, particularly when we're talking about black teachers.
Mm.
And a lot of it comes down to this racial bias fatigue that they experience because they're spending so much time fighting the good fight, fighting against hate, fighting against discrimination, that they've come to a halting point to where they can't do it anymore because they've been doing it for so long.
Right.
And it's now taking a physical and emotional, psychological toll on them. So they eventually throw the white flag and they move on to something else that's going to preserve their health.
Right.
It should not get to that point.
We're seeing that in droves. I mean, teachers are leaving the profession. And it's we see why. I mean, it's these cultures of inequity that are not acted upon, and then you just keep adding to the plate, and
Right.
not being mindful of the humanity of educators. And it's just, oh, it makes me
It's a lot.
wonder. You talk about the concept of moving from allyship to co-conspiratorship, and I wonder if that
Yeah.
might provide some insight into the types of solutions that really can work in this setting towards building stronger cultures. What does that mean to you?
When you are making a shift from being an ally to a co-conspirator, it's not only you acknowledging that these issues exist, but it's you transitioning to a place where you are speaking up and speaking out and advocating actively for your colleagues who are being discriminated against. So, yes, allies, they could wear the shirts that has the messages on there, whether it's, you know, a tie-dye shirt showing support to your LGBTQIA plus colleagues and students. You could have affinity spaces and everything. But let's look at legislation. Are you are you picketing? Are you calling your elected officials to put pressure on them to put certain policies in place to protect your most marginalized students? Are you attending town hall meetings? Are you even voting for elected officials, right? Are you taking the next step? Because here's the thing, when you get into a space of co-conspiratorship, you're putting something on the table. There's
Right.
an element of risk that's involved when it comes to when you're co-conspiring. And some people don't want to put their jobs in jeopardy. They want to play it safe. But when you are, you know, advocating, when you're engaged in activism in whatever shape or form, there is always going to be an element of risk. There is nothing safe about it. You have to put something on the table. And the difference fundamentally is this: allies aren't willing to put anything on the table. They're not willing to risk anything. Co-conspirators are.
Hmm.
And that's really the fundamental difference. Because here's the thing, if I'm in a professional development meeting, right, I have white colleagues around me, and this has happened to me. White colleagues who I consider to be, good friends of mine, right? Been
Right.
teaching with them for years. They see all the BS that happens with the black and brown teachers, and they don't say nothing during these meetings. But then when you call it out, now it's like, oh, it's just Kwame just speaking again. Just the black teacher speaking again. But then after the meeting's over and everything, they're the ones who gonna come up to you and discreetly say, "Hey, thank you for saying that. Thank you so much for saying that." And I'm thinking to myself, how come you didn't say that?
Yeah.
See, that's a prime example, right?
Well, and then in most of those instances, do you think it is like, is it an honest mistake? Is it like or is it just these culturally baked in things? Is there intention or aggressiveness or viciousness behind it?
More times than not, there isn't. But this is where people have to understand what I call the three P's. And I talk about this in a chapter in my book. So when I talk about the three P's when it comes to intersectional identity awareness, I'm talking about privilege, power, and positionality.
Mm,
So in the example that I gave, my white colleagues have more privilege, more power than I do in that situation. If they were to raise their hand and voice the same concerns that I voice, it would have been received differently
mm,
than it would from me. It would have been They would have been more receptive of the message, just for the
right.
simple fact that it's coming from the mouth of a white person. So so even though there is a level of innocence there and there's some real fear, they have to understand that in order for certain changes to happen within the school, sometimes they gotta be the ones to lead the charge. Quite
Right.
frankly, it should not be people of color leading the charge when it comes to these issues. We need for our white co-conspirators and white allies to be the ones spearheading it. And I'm not saying that you got to flip a table over. We're not saying that at all. There are some strategic ways in which you can support your colleagues of color. And one of the best ways to do that is to simply ask the questions. Questioning, right?
Yeah.
For instance, if we're looking at data and we are seeing that there's a significant disparity between suspensions of black and brown students versus their white counterparts, let's ask the question of why that is.
Yes.
If there are certain policies that are clearly putting one group of students at an advantage over another, let's ask the question why.
Mm,
Let's ask the questions. If we are, if I'm in a room and I'm looking at a classroom library where most of my students are Black and Latinx, which has been the case for me throughout my entire career, but yet the books that are on my shelf are mostly from white authors and they have white protagonists. Why is that the case? Why are
beautiful. Yeah.
certain voices missing? And why are certain voices being centered? Why are certain perspectives being centered?
Mm,
We have to start asking the questions, right? We always tell students, we always encourage students to be thinkers, critical thinkers, and to
right.
develop their own agency around their learning. That holds true for teachers as well. We got to be critical thinkers. We can't just accept things at face value and
Mm,
then be surprised when certain injustices take place. We got to ask the questions because when we don't ask the questions, that's what allows for certain school leaders to get away with injustices. That's what allows
mm.
for some of your colleagues to get away with things that they know they shouldn't be doing. And
Yeah.
we don't hold them accountable.
I think so many of the people listening to this show are the type of leaders who if they knew these kinds of things were happening in their school, would want to do everything in their power to make a difference. And I wonder, is there almost like a scavenger hunt or a set of data I can objectively use as a leader to figure out kind of where I'm at with this work? Like, are there red flag areas I should be looking at? Like the library tour, such a very practical, actionable tool, looking at data around suspension. Are there other kind of data points that are really insightful, you think, in kind of gauging your culture?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, and this is where audits come in. This is where you need to do an equity audit, right? And typically, that usually involves a third party entity
Mm,
or an independent or external consultant who has no connection to the school, no
smart.
connection to the district or even the teachers in there. They're coming in to simply audit the operations of the school. They're looking at HR department, they're looking at special ed, they're looking at the teachers, faculty, they're looking at administration. They're holding interviews with different stakeholders, parents, students, community members. They're getting a 360 view of what's happening. And
Cool.
usually through these audits, you're able to get some information that's going to help you, that's going to help shore up the system that you have in place. So I would encourage any school leader to do a full audit of their school
Smart.
operations. I think that's number one. And that means tapping into your student body, tapping into your teachers, tapping into your non-instructional staff, so your custodial staff, the
Yeah.
people who work the cafeterias, your bus drivers, anybody who plays a role in the operation of the school needs to be a part of the audit because they all bring a perspective that's valuable. And once you get all this data, now you gotta look into the eye and once again ask the questions that need to be asked. And then once you get those answers to those questions, now you need to figure out what are the next steps? What do I need to do? See, it all
Very
goes
cool.
back to reflection. It's all
Yeah.
reflection.
And story, like what I hear about the external auditing process there is that I think so often we get entrenched in the story of our school and who we are and what our values are and how we're acting and showing up. And so there's something kind of beautiful about having an external set of eyes coming in and saying like, yeah, you say that, but have you been in the lunchroom and noticed how the students talk to the lunch helpers? And how does that speak
Hmm.
to your value of equity? And how does that speak to your value of empathy and respect? And I just think there's in some ways we get so blinded by the story we're telling ourselves that we need that external perspective.
Right. And I also think as school leaders, you're not able to get to every single classroom throughout the day. You're not able to
Right.
see everything. It's just impossible because there's so much that you have to do. And that's why I give principals and administrators a lot of credit. They have a
Right.
heavy workload and they have to deal with a lot. Because you're not just dealing with the school, you're also you're also a liaison to the district. Because the district has its own set of mandates that you need to follow through on in your school. So there's like a gazillion different jobs that you have to juggle on top of keeping your school afloat and making sure that it's an environment for students, to come and want to come and learn. So there's a lot there. But I would say that it's important to have a leadership structure that allows for you to delegate certain responsibilities to
Mm,
other people within your leadership team, right? So
right.
do you have a distributed leadership model that allows for you to delegate? Or are you operating in a paternalistic way where you feel
Mm,
like you gotta be the one to solve all the problems and no one else can do it but you?
right.
So we do have certain principals and school leaders who engage in that manner, and the results aren't always satisfactory. So we
Never,
have to ask
hardly
ourselves why.
satisfactory. Yeah.
We have to ask why.
Right. We've got to grow that collective efficacy. Like if we want
That's
there to
right.
be change in schools, one person can't hold all of it. Hmm.
That's the truth.
We've touched on this, and I think there's so much fear right now around this work. Like we're seeing even as high up schools like Harvard that they're being threatened that they've got to close their diversity offices, that they're not allowed to research terms like belonging, women, diverse, advocate. Like you see these lists of words, and we're seeing it in the higher institutions. We're seeing it trickle down into K-12.
That's right.
I mean, just thoughts?
So, so my thoughts on that is we have to look at the difference between education and schooling. This is what it comes down to ultimately. If we're talking about schooling, schooling is about compliance.
Yeah,
Schooling is about you sitting properly in your seat, your whole
factory mode.
class walking in a straight line. You, as a teacher, making sure that your objectives are on the board, even though it doesn't really do anything to enhance the lesson ultimately. You're still going to teach what you're going to teach. It's all for show. But there's a compliance that's involved when it comes to that. So schooling is adhering to rigid rules and regulations that are more times than not counterproductive to the development of your children.
Yes.
Schooling, right? I have a degree, a bachelor's degree in mathematics from Temple University, and I'm a proud Temple alum. But I'll be the first to tell you, I'm not the smartest person in the world. I just knew how to listen to my professors. I was just smart enough to go to the office hours every other day to tell my professor, hey, Doctor So and so, I'm struggling with this problem. Can you help me?
Mm,
And a lot of those classes I passed was because I was a student who was diligent.
right.
I had the intangibles. And because I had the intangibles, the professor saw my effort and he said, Kwame, man, I see you trying. Guess what? When we get this final exam, we're going to curve them grades. We're just going to do a bell curve. Make sure that you protect it. And it's because of effort, right?
Mm,
So when I think about schooling, I learned that if I raise my hand enough times, that teacher's going to think that I'm a student who's engaged.
right. There's a performative
If I
aspect to it.
participate enough, that's going to help my grade. If I go to the office hours, that's going to help my grade. If I show up to class every day with at least 95% attendance, I put myself in a better position of passing that class, even if I'm not passing my midterms or even that final. I figured it out at a very young age that if you
Mm,
do those simple things, you're at least guaranteed a C.
okay.
But that's now education happens everywhere.
Mm,
Education is happening right now. You and I are having a conversation, and guess who's going to learn from this? School leaders, aspiring leaders, teachers, even students who want to become teachers or administrators in the future. They are getting an education from our conversation right now.
hmm.
You have people who are teacher influencers who are recording parts of them in action.
Yeah,
Obviously, protecting the anonymity of their students in the process. Got to do that. But they're letting us, but they're letting us into their world to see what they do in action. That is another form of professional learning, right?
totally.
So I say all this to say in order for us to keep on doing this equity work, we got to be a bit more creative and innovative in how we do it, right? We're not going to be able to do everything within the brick and mortar of the school. Some things we need to do outside that space. And there are a lot of educators who have already started to do that. You're seeing educators leave the classroom and start their own schools, whether it's a home school or a micro school. That's one way to go about doing it. You have educators who are doing podcasts like myself, like you, where
Mm,
they're interviewing other teachers and they're talking about these issues. You have teachers who do reels and vlogs. They're on TikTok. They're on Instagram, right? And they are doing things in a way that is exposing some of the issues that are taking place. You have teachers who have transitioned to consulting, who do keynote speaking across the nation, even beyond that. So there are
right,
different ways to engage. You're not just relegated to the classroom. You can engage students in ways that are going to benefit them. You can feed this information to parents as well, right? That's but we have to take advantage of the resources that are out there, especially
right.
now with social media and all these emerging technologies. We have an opportunity to do education in a way that's going to greatly benefit all stakeholders, especially our students.
Beautiful. What gives you the most hope in this work? I think, we've talked a lot about the types of actions you can take. What are you seeing that's giving you a sense of hope?
Um, More people's eyes are open to what's wrong with our education system. That's what gives me hope.
Right.
There's a heightened sense of awareness when it comes to the direction that we're going with our education system. I'm hopeful because a lot more young people are speaking up. So that's what encourages me is that the young people are more aware of what's happening. They seem to be just a lot more civically engaged. And because of that, they now are more equipped to address the issues that we've been trying to address for all these years. So that's
Mm,
why I remain hopeful because I believe that there's going to be a shift in what happens, even if I'm not around to see it.
yeah.
I feel like they're starting to build that foundation for change.
Well, and that everyone are seeing themselves in the role of change agent. Change agent is what I'm hearing in your answers, like consistently across the
Yeah,
day. It's that it's not
absolutely.
the job of one of us, and that
Nope.
it's students, it's teachers, it's leaders, it's janitors, it's
Exactly.
everybody telling the story of who, not who we've been, but who we're becoming, and who we want to see in the world. And I
Yes.
mean, a noble cause. So cool.
Yeah.
Well, my friend, thank you so much for sharing your insights. Can you hold up your book for us again and tell us the best place to find it?
Sure. So Learn to Relearn can be found pretty much at any online book retailer. You can get it directly from the publisher, Routledge or Stenhouse. You could also get it at Barnes and Nobles, um, Amazon, other places where they sell books. It's pretty much anywhere. And you could also go to the book's main website, learning2relearn.com, and that's a numeral two in the middle of that. Learning2relearn.com, where you'll learn about the different chapters in the book, but you could also get your copy from there as well.
So cool. And it's story driven. It's a pretty short read. It's powerful. So a great summer one to read by the beach for sure. So a great summer read.
Yes.
Kwame, yeah. Thanks so much for the work that you're doing. I think it's so important, and I'm just so glad to have you on the show.
Thank you, Cindy, for having me. This was a great conversation.
Yay.